The gavel came down with a deafening crack that resonated through the courtroom like lightning on a still evening. All subsequent sounds, the rustle of papers, the clearing of a throat, the camera click, seemed amplified, more acute, electrified. This was no ordinary court case. Atricas, this was the case. The one everyone had been waiting for. All seats in the courtroom were taken. Journalists held on to their notepads and microphones, their faces aglow with eagerness. Photographers fiddled with their lenses, recording each twitch of emotion, each vibration of movement. Relatives hunched over in the benches, their faces stuck between sadness and determination. And in the back pews, curious bystanders hissed to one another, hardly able to believe they were seeing the fall of the man whose family had once been paraded across TV screens as a testament to faith, unity, and polygamous devotion. The man at the center of everything, Kody Brown, sat at the defendant's table. He had on a black suit that seemed too large for him, the collar pinched close to his neck. His hair, which had once been golden and shaggy with bravado, was slicker today but couldn't conceal the tension that danced in his agitated eyes. He sat straight-backed, shoulders rigid, attempting a mask of command, but his shaking hands gave him away. Seated behind him was Robyn Brown, his fourth and last wife. She held onto his arm, her face white, her mouth moved in silent prayers, words of reassurance, or maybe supplications. But her eyes betrayed her. She was frightened. Frightened of what would be said here in this courtroom. Frightened of what the world would finally know of the man she had defended, stood by, and loved as his other wives departed. And then the voice of power sliced through the tension, like a sword. "This court will hear the case of Kody Brown against his family," declared the judge, his voice firm, his gavel still ringing with the impact of the blow. The courtroom became still. Even the reporters ceased their wild scribbling for an instant. Everyone was eager to hear the first words that came out in this trial. Words which could reveal centuries of secrets, deceptions, and betrayals. On the other side of Kody, sitting together but each with their own crosses to bear, sat Christine, Janelle, and Meri. No word was needed for the world to know the extent of their suffering. It was etched in their faces, carved into their angles, emanating from their very being. Christine, her eyes ablaze with a flame rekindled after all those years of quietude, leaned forward slightly. She was the one who had first departed, the one who had openly defied Kody's rule before an audience of millions. And now, her bravery was set to take fire in the courtroom. Seated next to her was Janelle, serene but resolute, her countenance unwavering like rock. She had for years been the voice of sense in the family, the one to forgo her ambitions for security, the one to subordinate her own needs to those of the children. No one escapes betrayal, however, and in her eyes lingered secrets she was ready to bear. Meri, the former legal wife, the foundation of Kody's kingdom, sat in silence. Her silence was more potent than anything she could have said so far. Abandonment had etched lines on her face, but there was strength too, the strength of a woman who had at last realized the truth after years of living on lies. She had a folded paper in her lap, her knuckles tightening around it. The world had always believed the tale was straightforward. Kody abandoned his first 3 wives for Robyn. He discovered in her what he said he had lost in the others: love, trust, loyalty. The public perceived him as selfish, as a man who had made a choice between 1 woman and 3. But the reality was much more complex, and much uglier. Because today, this trial wasn't only about abandonment, it was about secrets. Secrets that Kody had struggled to conceal. Secrets that had been shared behind closed doors, whispered in veiled conversations, and hidden under years of manipulation. And now, those secrets were going to be revealed under oath. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We are here to establish the truth, to find out if Mr. Brown has been honest or dishonest, loyal or treacherous. Let us continue." The gravity of his words weighed heavy in the air. Christine's chest rose and fell sharply. Janelle clenched her jaw. Meri's hands shook slightly around the paper she held. And across the room, Robyn gripped Kody tighter, as though holding him back from drowning. Kody himself shifted in his seat, his voice low as he muttered, "This is ridiculous. They're exaggerating. They're trying to ruin me." But no one heard him. Or perhaps no one cared. The reporters leaned forward. The gallery sat on the edge of their seats. The wives held on. And then it started. Christine stood first, her chair scraping against the floor, the sound cutting through the silence. She glanced at the judge, then at Kody, then out into the courtroom, her voice shaking but firm. "Your Honor, the world believes this is a tale of a man who abandoned 3 wives for one. But it's not that. Far from it. This is a tale of betrayal, of deception, of hidden overtures Kody believed would never see the light of day. We are here because the truth has been in the ground too long." Her words rippled through the crowd. Whispers increased, reporters wrote madly. Cameras snapped like gunfire. Kody paled, then blushed. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pulling at his collar, his pride shattering beneath the force of Christine's words. "Lies," he grumbled. "She is inventing this." But his objection only added to the drama, to the believability. Janelle leaned over Christine, nodding for her to go on. Meri looked down at her paper, her lips set in a pout. Robyn's grip on Kody's arm grew tighter, her nails biting into his sleeve. The judge held up a hand. "This court will hear the evidence in due course. But for now, Mrs. Brown, you may proceed." And with that permission, Christine's eyes welled up with tears. Not of weakness, but of release. Years of silence, years of hiding, years of pretending, were finally coming to an end. The air in the courtroom became thick. Every heart pumped harder. The truth, buried for so long, was finally coming to the surface. And as Christine breathed, the world held their breath. Because this wasn't just the start of a trial. This was the start of the end. For Kody Brown, for his empire, and for the secrets he believed would forever be buried. The courtroom air was heavy, nearly stifling. The initial words were out, but everyone knew the storm was really just getting underway. Christine's eyes seared as she looked across the room at Kody, the man she loved, the father of her children, the patriarch who had vowed to her forever. Her voice was shaking with rage and tears, but she would not let fear quiet her. She rose from her seat slowly, her hands clutching the edge of the table for strength. For a moment she looked down at the floor, gathering her courage. Then she lifted her chin and met the judge's eyes. "Your Honor," she started, her voice gentle but loud enough for all to hear. "The world believes this is about a man who just prioritized one wife over the others. They believe Kody left us because love wore off, or because we couldn't coexist. But that's not the case. The truth is much darker." A murmur of whispers circulated the courtroom. The journalists moved forward, writing furiously with their pens against paper. The judge cocked an eyebrow, signaling Christine to go on. Christine swallowed hard, her throat constricted. "Kody did not leave us. He lied to us. He made covert overtures, midnight whispers of promises, hidden vows of devotion he had no intention of fulfilling. He said I was his favorite one week, and the next said the same to Robyn. He would say love in our ears and build walls behind our backs. He played us against one another, and he reveled in it." In gasps echoed through the room. Robyn winced, her hold on Kody's arm tightening. Kody's jaw set, his knuckles white against the table as he pounded his palm down. "Lies," his voice rang out in the courtroom, sharp and defensive. "She's turning everything around. I gave you my heart, Christine. I gave this family my life." But Christine didn't give in. She shouted louder, her eyes brimming with tears. "No, Kody. You gave us fantasies. You gave us pieces. You said to me, 'You're the one who keeps me grounded.' And then turned around and said it to Janelle too. You leaned over and told Meri she was your first love. No one could ever take her place. And meanwhile, you were telling Robyn she was the only one who ever mattered." The courtroom fell silent, the force of her words hanging heavy in the air. The judge glared at Kody. "You will be quiet until it is time for you to answer, Mr. Brown." Kody clamped his tongue between his teeth, nostrils flaring, eyes flying between Christine and the judge. Christine dabbed away tears and took her seat, shaking. Janelle set a reassuring hand on her shoulder before standing up to face the court. Janelle was a different presence. While Christine's pain flamed like fire, Janelle's anger was constant, relentless, like ice. She opened a folder in her palms, the papers within crisp and cutting. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "this isn't just about words. I have evidence. Emails, messages, late-night texts Kody thought we'd never see, promises he made privately, while telling us something completely different. Financial records that show money being funneled into accounts we didn't know about. He wasn't just playing with our emotions, he was planning a life without us." The audience burst out in whispers. The judge rapped his gavel, insisting upon order, but tension increased. Janelle stepped closer to the bench and handed the folder to the court clerk. "These records show secret bank transfers. Vacations he took with Robyn, paid for with money he told us was going toward building our homes. Messages where he told Christine she was the only one who mattered. And then within days, sent Robyn the same words. He lied to us. Repeatedly. And he thought we'd never find out." Kody's face went white. He jerked his head back and forth, his voice ringing out into the stillness. "They are personal. You don't have any right. This is taken out of context. Janelle, you know how things can be distorted. Twisted?" Janelle lashed out, her facade finally cracking. "You twisted us, Kody. You twisted our faith, our love, our loyalty. You used us against one another, so you could maintain control. You wanted us to fight, because the more we fought the stronger you felt." Her voice broke and tears pricked in her eyes. She put a shaking hand on her chest. "I gave you my prime years. I stood up for you when the world called you selfish. I believed your dream, Kody, and this is what you repaid me. Betrayal, deception, and manipulation." The room fell silent once more, the sort of silence that follows a storm but precedes the next one. Everyone's eyes shifted to Meri, who had yet to say a word. She sat immobile, the piece of paper still wadded up tightly in her lap. For a very long time, she didn't get up. Her eyes were cast downward, her frame weighed down with decades of unspoken hurt. But then, taking a deep breath, she rose. The paper trembled in her hand as she smoothed it out, placing it flat upon the table. When she did speak, her voice was soft, but it carried across the courtroom like a prayer. "Kody, I waited. I waited longer than anyone. I waited for you to return. I prayed you would lay eyes on me again, the way you used to. You said I was your first love. You said no one could ever take my place. And I believed you." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. She held up the page. "This is a letter you wrote me years ago. You told me, 'Meri, you are my rock. You are the one I will always come home to.' But Kody, you didn't come home anymore. You ceased visiting me. You informed the cameras that we were broken, but you informed me in private that you still cared. You kept me waiting for a commitment you never had any plans to fulfill." Her hands were trembling now, the letter shaking in her hand. "Do you have any idea what it does to a person, to think that they were loved, only to know it was an act? You didn't just betray me, you erased me." The courtroom was quiet. Reporters were sobbing softly as they took notes. Even the judge's eyes were moistened. Kody glared at Meri, his eyes twisted in a combination of anger and desperation. "Meri, that's not right. You know I tried. You know," but she stopped him, her voice now cold. "No, Kody, you didn't try. You lied. You stringed me along. You gave me hope, then you destroyed it, and I will no longer let you do that." The judge leaned forward, his tone serious. "Mr. Brown, these are serious charges supported by emotional testimony and documented proof. If these allegations hold true, it paints a vivid picture of manipulation and deception." The room buzzed once more, the hum of whispers rising like a tide. Christine glared at Kody, with a fierce glint in her eyes. Janelle folded her arms, determined. Meri refolded the letter back into her lap, her tear-streaked face stronger than she had ever appeared, and Kody sat there, retreating. For the first time, the patriarch who'd once ruled a family empire looked small, cornered, and vulnerable. The allegations had been exposed, the secrets had been uttered, and the world now held its breath, waiting to see how far this truth would travel. Because this was no longer merely about doomed marriages. This was about power, lies and betrayal on the grandest of stages. And Kody Brown was finally standing trial for it all. The judge's gavel lay motionless on his bench, but the burden of the moment weighed more heavily than any blow it might land. The charges had been filed, the proof unveiled. Now it was time for the voices of anguish behind the hurt, voices gagged for decades, to ring out loud. The quiet was heavy, hanging in the courtroom like a smothering blanket. Everyone waited, eyes flicking among the three women seated together, connected not only by marriage but by the years of betrayal. Christine's hands shook in her lap, but when she stood again, her face shone with resolve. She breathed in deeply, and then her voice burst out, raw with feeling. Your Honor, I need you to realize something. To the world, I was mere wife. Another face on TV, they said. Christine knew what she was getting herself into. They laughed at our existence, teased our decisions. But what they couldn't see were the quiet moments. The moments when I pleaded with Kody to pay attention to me, to notice us. He said I was the heart of the family. He said to me that without me it would all come apart. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. She was holding on to the railing of the witness stand, her knuckles white as a bone. But then, he stopped noticing me. He stopped caring. He said I was too sensitive, too dramatic. And when I asked him for love, he said I should be more like Robyn. Gasps of astonishment circulated the room. Journalists scribbled frantically, the pens scrawling like thunder. Christine addressed Kody, her eyes blazing. You broke me, Kody. You made me feel less, that I wasn't enough. But here is the truth. It was not me who wasn't enough. It was you. You couldn't love us as much as you said. And instead of owning up, you lied. You made secret vows, spoke words of love to each of us, but built a future solely for her. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lips pinched into a thin line. Robyn's grip around his arm tightened, but her face turned white. Christine slumped back down, shaking, crying loudly. Janelle huddled forward beside her, speaking softly some comforting words, before getting up herself. Where Christine's words had seared like fire, Janelle's voice was resolute, steadfast, but had an icy burden that sliced just as intensely. She stood upright, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the judge. I've always been practical, Janelle started. I was the one who kept the books, who put in overtime, who provided for the kids. I didn't expect grand gestures. I just needed respect, partnership, honesty. She pushed a pile of papers off the table, same evidence she had presented before, and set them down with a quick slap. What I got were lies. I received half-truths. I received bank accounts I didn't even know we had. Money sent elsewhere, holidays taken without us. I was raising children while he was promising Robyn things. And when I stood up to him, do you know what he said to me? He said that I was being too reactive, that I needed to support him better. Her tone grew cold, her jaw clenching. In support of what? Of betrayal, of lies. I stood by him when people sneered at us. I stood up for him when my own family doubted my decisions. And this is how he returned the favor. She hesitated, her voice breaking as she glistened. I figured if I just worked harder, if I just kept the family together, he would finally realize that I was there. But he never did. Kody only saw himself. The courtroom grew silent. Janelle's voice broke just at the end, and she sat quickly back down, wiping at tears. All eyes were now on Meri. She had sat in silence for the majority of the proceedings, her silence resounding. For years she was the first wife, the legally wedded wife, the one who thought she was special. But she had also been the most shattered, her trust dismantled piece by piece, until hardly anything was left. Meri stood up slowly, letter still clutched in her hand. Her hands shook as she unfolded it again, holding it against her chest. She breathed deeply, her voice nearly a whisper at first. I remained, she explained. I remained longer than anyone. I waited for him. I prayed nightly, that one day the man I wed would return to me. I was the first wife. I was the one who was supposed to be important. He said to me once, Meri, you are my rock. You're the one I'll always return to. And I believed him. I believed all of it. Her voice was shaking, and she clutched the letter to her mouth, her tears dropping onto the paper. But then, he stopped returning home. he stopped referring to me as his wife. He told everyone on television that we were through, but in private he kept giving me false hope. He said, "Meri, we'll find a way." He told me not to lose faith. She swung around to face Kody, her own eyes red, but keen with hurt. Do you have any idea what that does to a human being? To be in limbo, to think you are loved, and then find out you're merely being kept on a shelf until you're no longer useful. You didn't just cheat on me, Kody. You erased me. You erased the love we created. You erased my place within this family. Her words hung before us like a ghostly echo. Reporters dabbed away tears. Even strangers in the gallery shook their heads, their faces weighed with sympathy. Kody shifted uncomfortably, his voice trembling as he attempted to break in. "Meri, that's not right. You know I cared." But she interrupted him, her voice now firm, keen enough to quiet the whole room. "No, Kody, you were concerned about control. You were concerned about your reputation, but you weren't concerned about me. Not actually. If you were, I would not be standing here today, sharing with everyone how you wrecked me." The judge leaned forward, his face unreadable, but his eyes relaxing ever so slightly. "Mrs. Brown, thank you. Please, sit down." Meri sat down slowly, holding the letter to her chest. The three wives sat together, their hurt exposed, their truths revealed. For years they had been pitted against each other, having to fight for scraps of attention. But here, in this courtroom, they stood together as one voice. The ensuing silence was a deafening one. Kody remained stiff, his face ashen, his lips compressed. For once he had no thunderous words, no booming voice to dominate them. His wives had spoken, and the world listened. The judge struck his gavel gently, his voice steady, but serious. "The testimonies are compelling, the evidence weighty. This is not a matter of shattered marriages. It is a case of a pattern of lies, of manipulation of the heart, of vows given and betrayed. The court will take this into account." The wives leaned against one another, spent but relieved. Their voices had long been unmoored. The years of silence, of waiting, of suffering, all of them were now free. And for the first time it wasn't their burden alone. It was Kody's. The air in the courtroom had turned heavy. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the pain, the betrayal, the years of silence that had just erupted into raw testimony. Christine's fire, Janelle's icy truth, Meri's devastating heartbreak. Their words still echoed in the minds of everyone present. All eyes turned back to Kody Brown. He slumped hunched over the defense table, the proud posture that had once been his now folding into itself. The man who had paraded across television screens for more than 10 years, dominating the spotlight with his golden curls and booming voice, now seemed diminutive. A faint tremble shook his shoulders as he drummed his fingers on the table. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Brown, this is your chance to respond. You can speak." Kody stood up, his chair squeaking on the tile. For an instant he was his old self, the patriarch in control, the man who had 18 children and 4 wives under his wing. His gaze swept the room for a friendly smile. But no matter where he glanced, he found only hostile faces. Reporters hung forward expectantly. His sons and daughters sat rigidly in the gallery, some avoiding his gaze, others openly glaring. At last, he fixed upon Robyn. She smiled weakly at him, her hand grasped against her chest as if prodding him forward. With a trembling breath, Kody stood tall. "Your Honor," he started, his voice bearing its accustomed commanding force. "I realize what they've said sounds incriminating. I realize they've made me out to be some sort of villain, but I am not the monster they portray me to be. I am a father, I am a husband, and everything that I have done, everything was for the protection of my family." He threw his arms wide, speaking not only to the judge but to the whole room. "When we decided on polygamy, we understood that it wouldn't be easy. We were doing battle against the laws, against society, against hate, and I bore that load for all of them. I took the arrows. I shielded them. I gave up something, and now, because I attempted to hold us together, they accuse me of betrayal." Christine leapt to her feet, anger blazing in her eyes, but was dragged back down by her lawyer. Kody insisted, feeling his grip falter. His words quickened, becoming more panicked. "Yes, I've made errors. Yes, I loved Robyn. But is that a crime? To love one wife more, to desire peace over endless bickering. They call it favoritism. I call it survival. They could not abide it, so they turned against me. And now they hold me up in court, attempting to destroy the very man who constructed this family. His voice thundered, reverberating off the walls of the courtroom. But where there should have been respect, murmurs filled the room with disgust. Reporters wrote "Loved Robyn more" in a gleeful scratch. The judge spoke forward, his voice biting. "Mr. Brown, this is not TV. This is evidence of financial dishonesty, emotional manipulation, and shattered legal commitments. Speak to the facts." Kody stumbled, sweat glistening on his brow. His gaze flicked to the pile of papers Janelle had given him. Bank statements, deeds to properties transferred, invoices for lavish vacations, spent only with Robyn. "I took care of all of them," he stuttered. "Perhaps not all on an equal level, but I did what I could." "Not equally." Janelle's words sliced through, but she did not leave her seat. "You spent thousands on Robyn's new house, and my kids were stuck wearing second-hand clothes. You gave me your word of fairness. Kody, fairness was your word. Do you even recall that?" Kody's lips parted, but he made no sound. Christine nodded forward, her voice trembling with anger. "You gazed at me and told me love must be multiplied, not shared, but you shared us until there was nothing left. Don't stand there and act like you were shielding us." Even Meri, who had been quiet once more, breathed so softly that the whole room fell silent to hear. "You vowed to me forever." The words cut through him like blades. His face turned red, his chest rising and falling, as if the burden of the three voices was crashing down on him simultaneously. Robyn leapt up, her eyes wild and panicked. "Stop, all of you," she exclaimed, her voice shattering. "You don't know. Kody didn't want to hurt anyone. He was drowning. He was grabbing for something that made sense." Tears flowed down her face as she wheeled on the wives. "Don't you realize? You left him. You left him. He only held on to me because you drove him away." The courtroom gasped. Christine leapt to her feet, indignation in her voice. "We didn't leave him behind. He left us long ago when we left that door." Janelle slapped the table. "We pleaded with him to listen. Robyn, we pleaded for him to show up. He chose you. Time and time again, he chose you." Robyn's sobs echoed as she collapsed back into her seat. Kody placed a trembling hand on her shoulder, but the gesture only made the room colder. The judge's gavel cracked down. "Enough." Silence fell like a hammer. The judge's eyes drilled into Kody's. "Mr. Brown, your words say more than you know. You acknowledge favoritism. You acknowledge neglect. And the financial records that have been presented demonstrate a pattern of dishonesty that cannot be overlooked. This is not a matter of mere family squabbles. This is a matter of betrayal on all levels. Emotional, financial, and moral." Kody's legs trembled, and he slumped into his chair, hiding his face in his hands. For the first time, the mighty patriarch was silenced. His empire, constructed on the facade of unity, was collapsing in broad daylight. Christine, Janelle, and Meri looked at each other. For years they'd been divided, manipulated, turned against one another. But here, in this courtroom with the truth on their side, they were more powerful than he could ever dream. The audience murmured as the words spread like fire. Kody revealed. The wives united. The Brown Empire toppled. The judge rose. "This court will recess prior to final deliberation. Upon return, judgment will be rendered." The gavel came down, and the room descended into pandemonium. Reporters bolted out into the night, cameras blindingly flashing. The wives hugged each other, tears blurring into relief. Their truth had been heard. Kody remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the floor, Robyn grasping frantically at his arm. But his expression spoke the tale that no camera needed to capture. The fall of a man who had thought himself above the law. For so long, he had dictated the terms. On television, at home, in the lives of the women who had believed in him. But now, under oath, under the strain of the truth, the facade had cracked. Kody Brown was no longer the king of a polygamous kingdom. He was merely a man, revealed, vanquished, alone. The courtroom fell still once more with the return of the judge. The respite had been brief, but it seemed like an eternity. Reporters congregated outside, relaying every second to a starved world, while within the walls, Tension had its grip on every person like a vice. Kody slumped over the defense table, head bowed, his golden curls now limp against his forehead. Robyn held tight to him, her tear-stained face rubbing against his shoulder as she mouthed desperate prayers into the air. On the other side of the aisle, Christine, Janelle, and Meri sat side by side, finally united. Their hands were locked together, the beat of 3 hearts synchronized, awaiting the verdict that would seal their destinies. The judge squared his glasses, his tone serious and measured. This court has examined the testimony and the statements that were made. What I have seen here is not just a breakdown of marriage, it is the unraveling of years of manipulation, lies and promises broken. A shiver ran through the gallery. Cameras snapped softly, recording the weight of the moment. The judge went on, his voice stern. Mr. Brown, you appeared before this court as a protector, a provider, a patriarch. But the facts present a different picture. Torn and marked financial documents expose favoritism and deceit. The depositions of your wives expose a long history of emotional abandonment and betrayal. You deceived those who trusted you most, and in that deceit, you dismantled the very institution you said you protected. Kody swallowed hard, his lips trembling. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. Enough. You've spoken. Now it is time for accountability. The room leaned forward, every ear straining to catch the words. This court rules in favor of Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Meri Brown. Gasps exploded in the room. Reporters' pens flew across their notepads. Cameras flashed like lightning. Christine clutched Janelle's and Meri's hands tighter, tears streaming down her face. Janelle let out a breath she had been holding for years, while Meri simply bowed her head. The letter still clutched in her hand, her tears dripping onto the folded paper. The voice of the judge boomed again. Mr. Brown, you are instructed to provide complete financial compensation. Concealed assets and channeled funds will be split equally. Properties bought in secret will revert to the common estate. Additionally, the court sees your dereliction as basis for termination of all remaining spousal claims. You are no longer legally bound to Christine, Janelle, or Meri Brown from today on. Kody's face contorted. His empire was lost. The marriages, the power, the story he had dictated for so long, it had all slipped away from him like sand. But the judge wasn't done. And one other thing, he asserted, his voice heavy with gravity that quieted even the humming press. This court understands the emotional burden imposed on these women. You said you lead with love, but love without respect, without integrity, is nothing but control. Let this be a lesson not only to you, Mr. Brown, but to anyone who thinks power can justify betrayal. The gavel came crashing down. Court adjourned. The voice was absolute. The room burst into chaos. Reporters pushed toward the doors to report the news that would dominate the headlines. Kody Brown exposed, wives win in court. Polygamous empire falls. Christine sobbed, not from pain, but from release. She hugged Janelle and Meri, embracing them. For the first time in so many years, the 3 of them were no longer competing for scraps of love. They were no longer rivals. They were no longer co-wives. They were survivors, sisters in strength, connected by truth. We did it, Christine whispered through her tears. We finally did it. Janelle smiled faintly, her calm voice steady. We're free. Meri, still clutching the letter, finally let it fall onto the table. She whispered so softly it was almost lost in the chaos. Goodbye, Kody. Across the room, Kody sat frozen. Robyn tugged at his sleeve, begging him to stand, but he couldn't move. His body trembled, his eyes glazed as the reality sank in. For so long, he had been the focus, the man with the answers, the head of the house. But now, the spotlight had moved on. He was no longer the head of the house, no longer the leading man. He was just another man caught out by the truth. Robyn held onto his arm, her tears streaming down her face. Kody, we can do this. We still have us. We can rebuild. But Kody shook his arm free, covering his face with his hands. It's over, Robyn. It's all over. His all over. The wives left the courtroom side by side, heads held high, the burden of years at last shed. Outside, cameras snapped furiously. Reporters yelling questions. Christine, how do you feel? Janelle, what does this mean for your future? Meri, do you have any final words for Kody? The women did not pause to reply. They moved through the tumult with steady dignity, one beside the other, their silence more eloquent than any headline. When they ascended to the steps, Christine finally spoke to the crowd, her voice firm though the tears still sparkling on her face. His isn't about us, this is about every person who has ever been silenced, every person who has ever been told that their pain didn't count. Today we establish that truth counts, that we count, and that nobody, no one regardless of how much power they have, can silence our voices. The crowd cheered. Christine, Janelle, and Meri were no longer mere background figures in Kody's narrative. They were the writers of their own. Back in the courtroom, Kody stayed slumped over at the defense table. The courtroom had drained out, but the silence was louder than the tumult outside. Robyn sat next to him, drying her tears. But he didn't stir. The great patriarch of sister wives was deceased. In his stead, sat a man stripped down, beaten, with nothing but the sounds of vows he had shattered. And for the very first time in his life, nobody was hearing him.